The combination of legal, spiritual, and economic constraints on women added up to the several rebellions of women that emerged in the 17th and 18th century. Rules could be challenged, and even if most women obeyed legal and religious injunctions out of habit or deference, some constraints seemed too difficult to follow. One of the most famous examples of rebellion is that of Anne Hutchinson. You might remember her as an early 17th century settler, the wife of a prosperous merchant who immigrated to the colonies and who, in England, had already chosen not to listen any longer to priests and ministers, but to start exploring whether she too could have a direct relationship with God. The notion that God might speak unmediated through an ordinary individual was a heresy called antinomianism. Hutchinson, believing that she could not only hear God, but that he had asked her to speak, started to preach. Calling together her women friends on a Sunday morning, she held meetings that became so popular that after a while 30, 40, and 50 women might gather together to listen to her speak. Her claim to authority threatened community leaders like John Winthrop, and so without much ado, they asked her to keep silent. Refusing to do so, refusing to hold her tongue, Anne Hutchinson was banished from the colony. More usual were the women we have come to know as witches. In late 17th century Massachusetts, some 40 or so women and a handful of men were accused of witchcraft. Of the several women executed in the turmoil, most, it turned out, were vulnerable women who had offended their neighbors. They might have sold goods at too high a price, or spoken out of turn, or lacked some feminine trait like deference to men. Often the accused were widows of respected merchants left vulnerable by a husband's death. Among the women accused of witchcraft, we recall Tituba, an enslaved woman who had arrived in the Plymouth colony from the West Indies. Tituba apparently had well-respected medicinal powers, and yet, upon occasion, they failed her with dire consequences. She thus fell under suspicion, and when she was asked to suspend the practice of medicine, refused to do so. Tituba was one of the few women who was not the widow of a respected merchant who was executed for witchcraft. Women had other opportunities for rebellion, too. One thinks, for example, of those women who were captured by Native Americans when they were just going about their business. The one who's probably best known to us is Mary Rowlandson, who was captured during King Philip's War. We know about her because after being ransomed from several years in captivity, she wrote about the awful circumstances under which she'd been held. Indians often captured white people to replace those they had lost in battle or to disease. Rowlandson thought of her forced engagement in the tasks typical of the tribe as a violation of her own womanly expectations. Writing about them was thus a rebellious act. Hannah Dustin engaged in a different kind of rebellion. Taken captive during King William's War from her hometown of Haverhill, Massachusetts, she was just recovering from childbirth. She'd given birth only the day before to an infant child. Along with the child, she was imprisoned and held for about 6 weeks before she saw an opportunity to escape. The child didn't make it, but Hannah Dustin took the scalps of the 5 Indians sleeping in a tent with her in the middle of the night and escaped. She returned triumphantly to Haverhill, Massachusetts, where she met with a mixed reception. Cotton Mather, then the spiritual leader of the congregation, condemned her for taking the lives of people who were presumably innocent Indians. But others celebrated her because after all, she, a woman, had successfully escaped from captivity. The general consensus is that she remains a heroine. She seems to have been the first American woman to be honored with a statue. It was built in 1874 in Haverhill. We see yet a third kind of rebellion in Sacagawea, an 18-year-old Native American woman. Sacagawea is best known for guiding Lewis and Clark in their famous expedition in the early 1800s. She became a heroine, not just because she violated the injunctions of her Indian tribe in order to help foreign explorers, but because she did so with an energy and interpretive curiosity then thought not to be the qualities of women. To these stories, we might add those of the thousands of women who rebelled in less visible ways, by starting their own little businesses as milliners and dressmakers, by selling butter and eggs and keeping the proceeds to themselves, by seeking to live apart from abusive husbands, by reading fiction and writing under pseudonymous names. Indeed, because the circumstances of colonial life, of demography and religion and inheritance made women so valuable, some historians believe that women were more equal then than they would be again until much later in the 20th century.